From a purely like medical perspective, the Western way of doing medicine and Western knowledge offers a lot. Modern medicine does save lives and does help heal people and treat people. And there is a lot of knowledge within the scientific world that needs to be taken seriously and applied seriously to a person's health. But that being said, the plant medicine and the traditional forms of medicine also are a wealth of knowledge that needs to be applied to a person's health and do save lives and heal people as well.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to You Create's podcast, Many Different Birds, broadcasting on CJSW Radio, where we will hear authentic stories from special guests from all backgrounds and bridge the gap between non-Indigenous and Indigenous communities, with a special focus on the Canadian healthcare system. We want to open up the floor to honest discussions and get a deeper insight into how we can improve our healthcare practices and work on our own biases.
You are listening to CJSW 90.9 FM broadcasting out of Calgary, Alberta at the University of Calgary campus radio station located on Treaty 7 land. Before we begin, I want to acknowledge the traditional territories of the people of the Treaty 7 region in southern Alberta, which includes the Blackfoot Confederacy comprising the Siksika, Piikani, and Kainai First Nation, as well as the Tsuut'ina First Nation and the Stoney Nakoda, including the Chiniki, Bearspaw, and Goodstoney First Nations. The city of Calgary is also home to Métis Nation of Alberta, District 5 and 6. I would also like to note that University of Calgary is situated on land adjacent to where Bow River meets the Elbow River, and that the traditional Blackfoot name of this place is Mukinstis, which we now call the city of Calgary.
So today, we have a very special guest, Bridgette Elliot, who is a Métis guide and historian. So thank you so much for joining us today, Bridgette. And before we start, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, so it's my pleasure. My name is Bridgette Elliot. I am a Métis individual. I am a guide for Mohican Trails currently, and another place called Painted Warriors. I have a Bachelor of Arts in History from the King's University, and I grew up in Toefield, Alberta. So that's a little bit about me.
Where is that, Bridgette? Do you want to let us know? Because I don't know where that is.
So Toefield is a small town of about 2,000 people, about an hour southeast of Edmonton.
Southeast of Edmonton. Nice. And you said Toefields?
Yeah.
How was it living in like a small city community, kind of?
In a lot of ways it was good because you don't have like the big community problems that the city has. And so in a lot of aspects it's a lot safer. However, there are some like barriers when it comes to access to things and affordability of like living. And so a lot of the time, like if we needed bigger services and even just like most of our groceries and stuff, we would have to drive out to a city like Edmonton or Sherwood Park to get access to a lot of things.
That could be tough. That is kind of tough to have to, because you can't get everything right away. You have to kind of pre-plan in a way.
Yeah, for sure. Definitely.
Yeah, so a little bit of context for our listeners. I met Bridgette when I was actually at Painted Warriors, the campsite, in late May, I believe. Yes, in late May. And Bridgette did like a little forest exploration workshop for us where she kind of taught us about just like just things around us, how we can use trees for sunscreen, for example, how we can use plants for medicinal purposes, and just a little bit more about the nature that kind of surrounds us and the trees and plants that we see on a daily basis. Did not know that we can actually use them for so many things for our health. So one question I have for you, Bridgette, is what is holistic healing?
Yeah, so from an Indigenous perspective, holistic healing really means that you're doing more than treating the person's symptoms or physical symptoms. You're trying to find out what the cause of those symptoms is, and sometimes that cause isn't necessarily physical itself. A lot of the times it is emotional or mental or spiritual in some way, shape, or form. And so for Indigenous peoples, holistic healing really means that you're stepping back away from just treating the symptoms and just looking at sort of the surface evidence that's going on in the body. And you're digging a lot deeper and finding out what's causing those issues and then you treat that problem instead of just treating the symptoms.
Mm-hmm. And when did you start kind of like getting into wanting to learn more about this type of healing, a more natural way of healing?
Yeah, so when I first got into guiding, and kind of a huge part of my reconnection journey as a Métis individual who didn't grow up in their culture, I met knowledge keeper Brenda Holdhurt, and she's the owner of Mohican Trails, the company I work for now, and she introduced me to plant medicine, traditional plant medicine, and began to teach me about these plants about 4 years ago when I first met her. She was actually training me for another job, and that's kind of when my interest really peaked in learning about traditional plants and medicine, and like treating the whole person from an Indigenous perspective.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. And were you always interested in natural medicine, or after, I guess, learning from Brenda Holder, did you realize or kind of figure out that this is kind of like your calling in a way?
So, I mean, I was not always interested in it, to be honest with you. I guess the main thing that really spiked my interest at the kind of the beginning was that it was a way to reconnect to my culture. And I had always wanted from a very young age to pursue that and to pursue my culture in kind of every aspect possible. And so for me, it really stems from that. But as I have learned more, and as I continue to learn more, my relationship with healing and plants and medicine and learning about them has changed. So for me now, as opposed to 4 years ago when I first started to learn, I've come to a point where I'm starting to learn a lot more about the medicines and how to use them and apply them from Brenda. And so for me now, it's definitely a path that I feel called to stick to, learning about the plants and medicines, whereas in the beginning, it wasn't quite as much. It was something that kind of had to happen over time for me.
Mm-hmm. And why did you want to, I guess, reconnect? Or why did you want to reconnect in this way?
So being Métis, I grew up without any connection to my Métis community or Métis culture. But I did grow up knowing that I was Métis. And the only reason I really knew this was because of my grandmother, my kukum, who had done pretty much all the work in the family to find out that we were Métis, and to kind of try and find out what that meant for herself and for the rest of us. And so from a very young age, she always encouraged me to really pursue that and to go put myself on a path where I could have access to the community and to that knowledge and to that connection. And so I think from a very, very young age, that was kind of instilled in me. And I think also just in general, I think every Indigenous person has within them, especially if they've grown up without their culture or community, they have within them this piece of them that desperately wants to know more and to be connected, even if they can't necessarily identify that for themselves. And I think because of the discussions that I had with my grandmother from a very young age about this, I was just became aware of it a lot sooner than a lot of other people. And so that really kind of started the whole journey for me. And I just never really saw any other path for myself besides needing to know more and be part of my community again.
Mm-hmm. And your grandma, your kukum, do you kind of use kind of like the knowledge that she gives you? Is she kind of like a role model to you?
Yeah, she's been a very important role model and mentor to me. We're very, very close. She has been a huge inspiration in my life. She was a single mother. She pursued post-secondary education. As a single mother, she actually started her own business after the fact. And she really has overcome a lot of barriers in her life as both a woman and an Indigenous person. And also has always very much come at those things from a perspective of loving other people and healing for herself, but also what she can bring to the world. And so having that role model from a very young age and that close relationship with her really impacted the way that I see the world and the way I chose to pursue my reconnection with my culture.
Nice. And so after kind of learning more about natural medicine and learning about holistic healing, have you noticed a difference in your own well-being after starting this learning journey?
Yes, definitely. There's so much that I had no idea about when I started this journey. And as someone myself who lives with chronic illness, I have ulcerative colitis. There's so much knowledge that has like blown my mind, but also like a lot of mental and spiritual and emotional knowledge that I think as like a young child and as a teenager who was ill, I knew I needed, but I didn't know how to ask for, and I didn't necessarily know how to like put words to it. And so having that acknowledged by somebody within the medicinal and the health world, I think has really brought a lot of validation to my own experience, as well as giving me insight as to like what is going on in my body, and why it's going on, and how to kind of deal with that moving forward.
Mm-hmm. I feel like a lot of people who do have chronic illness, even if it's, let's say, not chronic, it's just, illness, for example, a lot of people, don't really know why it's happening, what's going on in their body, how they can fix it. And it's more so having a lot of trust and reliance on the healthcare system. And sometimes that can really take someone's autonomy away from them, because it's not like they're fully informed about what decisions they can make for themselves, because medically, as a citizen, you don't always know what's going on in the medicine world. And so I feel like, do you feel like learning this kind of gave you that autonomy to make your own decisions when it came down to your own health?
Yeah, I feel like for sure it has helped me kind of realize that there's like more options out there than just what the healthcare system presents. Especially like for myself and my own experience, like there wasn't really like options necessarily for treatment and stuff. It was more like you need to do this, you have to do this. It's kind of how it was presented from the doctors and such that I saw, versus I think now, while I am not saying that like modern medicine isn't important to treating somebody, I think that also like we can acknowledge that it's not the only way to treat somebody, and that maybe on its own it's not the most effective way, and that it's like there's some holes within the system that we need to work on filling. And so like for myself, there's still a lot I have to learn, and I'm still working through a lot of learning a lot about myself and my body as I continue to learn from Brenda and other people as well. But definitely it has given me kind of actually a hope that I didn't really have before when I was just being treated by the healthcare system, because now I know that like there's more options available, and also options that are natural, and also I think the fact that like there's an acknowledgement that there's more going on than just the physical symptoms is a really important part to acknowledging a person's autonomy when making decisions for their health. Because if you don't feel validated in your experience emotionally or mentally, it almost makes like experiencing the illness worse.
No, thank you so much for talking about your own like personal experience. And I know you just mentioned about that there are holes in the healthcare system, and for sure there are holes. So specifically in the system, what kind of barriers did you experience when you were kind of going through treatment, going and seeing doctors, going to hospitals? How was that for you?
Yeah, I mean, I was 14 when I first started to get really sick with ulcerative colitis. And 14 is just like an awkward age in general. You're not really confident yet. There's a lot going on in your body in general, let alone if you like throw chronic illness and mental health stuff into the mix. And so I, was sick, and so we just kind of started with our family doctor, and from there we ended up getting referred to the Stollery at the U of A in Edmonton, which is over an hour drive from where we live in Toefield. And so there was kind of like this insane pressure on my mom, actually, to kind of make sure like I got to all of my appointments and everything. And so I remember like she had to take off work a lot of the time, because you can't like schedule an appointment when it works for you. Like you're given an appointment time and you're expected to be at that appointment, right? And so like there was a lot of pressure on her as a parent, especially as a working parent, to kind of take time off work and to like drive me to these appointments. And so then you're looking at least honestly 4 hours out of the day sometimes just to go to an appointment, have the appointment, and come back home. And like, living in rural Alberta as well, where we have harsh winters and stuff, that could be stressful as well, because the whole issue of just getting to the city sometimes, even though we didn't even live that far away from the city for a rural community. But all it takes is one snowstorm to mess up the roads so that you can't get to your appointment, or to have extra added stress about that. And two, there was a lot of tests and medical testing that had to be done. At one point, I was getting my blood work taken like at least twice a month. And we're very fortunate because we live in a community that has a community health center. So like kind of a hospital, or like a lesser version of a hospital, if you will, with a lab. And so like I'm actually very fortunate as somebody who lives rurally that we had that right in town. So thankfully that was quite available. But that doesn't necessarily mean it was always easy, because living even with that health center, that in itself had a lot of barriers, because it's very, very common in rural community health centers for them to be short-staffed and overworked. And so there could be like insane wait times just to get like a couple tubes of blood work done, or some tests done or something like that. I think those are some of the biggest barriers, I think. It's just kind of access, and like not having enough staff within community centers for rural places.
So yeah, I know.
And then I guess.
Sorry, yeah.
Oh, That's okay. And then I guess just from like an Indigenous perspective on that as well, you know, like traditionally that's not how we would treat people who are ill, right? And so even though like it was a barrier that I wasn't really aware of at the time, but like looking back now as an adult who's back in the community and has had access to some of the more traditional resources as of late, it's really made me think about like the sort of the clash in cultural interpretation of health and well-being, and how like not having access to a traditional form of healthcare and well-being and healing was a barrier in and of itself that like doesn't even like it can't even be put in the same box as the rest of the healthcare system barriers, I guess.
Yeah. No, I get that. I feel like as a kid you don't really, because like you were saying, you're still struggling with your identity. So for you, you didn't realize that there was another way of healing. And so now that you know, you're like, that was a barrier. And I feel like even when we look at modern medicine, a lot of traditional medicine is, like you said, pushed to the side, and it's put in a category that is not really talked about at all. And like you said, you were mentioning how, let's say, you know, we live in Alberta. We're very used to the weather changing in a split second. As of right now, it's super windy outside, and there's a hailstorm, there's fires somewhere. So like you said, there were sometimes the snowstorms would come and there would be like, you know, blockage. What would you do if you weren't able to drive to, I guess, like the University of Alberta? Like you would have to, I'm assuming, would you have to change your appointment date, or did it just keep getting pushed and pushed because sometimes the lack of access was really hard for you and your mom?
You know, I think we were really fortunate, to be honest with you, that it didn't happen too often. We're just very blessed in the fact that most of the time the roads were safe enough to drive on. But I think there was one or two instances where we just kind of had to say, like, there's no possible way we can get in for this appointment. We need to reschedule it, or we need to push it back, which is really hard, obviously for me because I was suffering physically, but also like I think for my mama as well, because she had all this pressure on her as a parent to like take care of her kid, and so you know there's like an added stress for her there, and unfortunately, like in most cases, the healthcare system as a system is quite apathetic to those sorts of circumstances. You know, the individual on the other end of the phone and the administrative desk were usually quite empathetic and kind about it, but you know, as a system, it's quite apathetic, and there's not really much that they're willing to do to accommodate that, or like to make things more accessible. And like to a certain extent, how can they without the support and the push from the government and other organizations and communities?
Mm-hmm. And so I know you mentioned that it was really tough for your mom being a single mother. What was kind of like the biggest lesson you learned from her that you would want to carry on?
Yeah, so my mom, she wasn't a single mother, but my dad was a truck driver.
Okay.
So he was basically never home.
Okay. Sorry about that. Yeah.
That's all right. So a lot of the time, like a lot of those, like taking care of the kids' responsibilities fell on top of her, just because my dad was away working. And so she didn't just do like work, like she wasn't just a home mom. She worked a full-time job in the education system, and like worked with children with disabilities in the public education system. And then she would come home and take care of two kids and do all of the cooking and all of the cleaning, and like do all kinds of like handiwork and fix-it things from around the house. And my mom was very much like, she made all of meals and food from scratch because we couldn't necessarily afford to like eat out or buy prepackaged food and processed food and stuff. So she made everything from scratch, which is 10 times more work after working an 8-hour work day. And then, she had all of these appointments and things to worry about with me, and my brother as well, because he has had some of his own struggles. And so I think that the biggest thing that I guess I could take away from my mom and her approach to all that is she just was an absolute force. And she really was driven by like love for her kids and her family more than anything else. And I think like a lot of the times her mama bear instincts just kicked in because it was the only way that we were going to get our needs met within the healthcare system, was if she like stood up and advocated for us kids and like made sure that we were getting access to the resources or the appointments that we needed to the best of her abilities. Because again, this is one of those circumstances where, she didn't necessarily know everything there was to know about my illness, or how to, approach that from a traditional perspective either. And very much a case of, we were really reliant on the doctors and the information they were giving us because it was kind of the only information we had access to. And so the best that my mom could do in those situations was to listen to the doctors and take their advice. But also from within that, she made sure that like as much as possible, we never missed an appointment. And if she wasn't sure about something a doctor was telling her or it didn't make sense, or she didn't understand or it concerned her, she would not hesitate to ask as many questions as possible until she felt satisfied with the answer she was getting for us.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, no, that's good. I've talked to, I volunteer in this organization where I work with clients, and one complaint that a lot of my clients have is that they feel almost rushed when they go see their doctors. And so like you mentioned, that your mom, if she was confused about something, she would take the time to understand it, which I think is really important, because so many people feel, personally, sometimes when I go to my doctor's appointments, even if I have a very simple question, I feel very rushed, that sometimes I feel like, I'm being a burden to the doctor and that I should not ask the question because I just feel like they're not giving me the space to ask or question or learn from what the doctor knows. So I do really appreciate your mom taking that time to truly understand what the doctor was saying, because I know that can be really hard too. Yeah, no, for sure. Especially if you're coming at it from like a background where you yourself as a patient don't have any medical or biological background or education. Sometimes doctors speak what feels like a whole different language, and so trying to understand that language, but in like a rushed or what feels like an unsafe setting, or just where the space isn't made for it, like you don't even necessarily feel safe or like you can or should ask questions. And so it can be really hard to advocate for yourself in that space as well as a patient. Yeah, no, 100%. And it was really awesome that your mom could do the advocating for you, because you were young and you needed the information. So I agree with you 100%. So did you ever feel like, with the language barrier, there's like that medicine language, and then there's like the language that we use on a day-to-day basis. Did you feel like, even maybe now, do you feel like there is a language barrier between understanding the medical knowledge versus just how we regularly talk to like our friends and our family? Yeah, for sure. I definitely do. As an adult for the past like 4 years, I've been going into all my appointments and everything by myself now, and doing all that stuff by myself without my mom. And so it's really hard, honestly, to like advocate for yourself and to like ask those questions and understand things. And I leave an appointment and I feel stupid, even though I'm not a stupid person,
because I just didn't understand what the doctor was saying. And sometimes when I try to ask questions, the doctors kind of brush you off, or their answers don't make sense, or it feels like they're only giving you like a very limited perspective, or like half of the information, or a very small portion of that information, which really doesn't help you understand what's going on in your body, or what's wrong, or how to treat it, or heal, or move forward. And so that language barrier, I think, is huge, because without like your doctor to explain the kind of biological processes happening in your body, you don't necessarily understand what they're getting at when they offer you treatment options, or why they pick those treatment options, etc. And that's one thing too in my experience with Brenda that has like really opened my eyes a lot, is because Brenda, as much as she is a traditional plant and medicine knowledge keeper and an herbalist, she also has formal post-secondary education in the biological and scientific world. And so she is able to kind of apply both Western scientific knowledge and traditional knowledge at the same time. And so she will never just like tell you what to do, pretty much. If treating something, in my experience, she always takes the time to like explain what is going on, or the possible things going on in your body that could be causing this, and possible forms of treatment, and why those treatments could or could not work, and like what her opinion would be the best and why, regarding like the plant treatments, because she knows, as somebody from an Indigenous community, that it's important that people understand what's going on in their body for themselves. And that's one of the things about a traditional perspective on healing and medicine as well, is that the patient or the person that is ill needs to be a part of their own healing journey, and they need to have an active role in that. And that is something that, while in some ways the modern healthcare system does stress, it doesn't necessarily stress it in a sustainable way for the patients.
Yeah. No, I think the biggest piece on autonomy is very important, because if the patient themselves doesn't feel comfortable advocating for themselves, or asking those questions, or taking a control of their own health, then who will, essentially? So I think that's very important. And I know you mentioned just recently, you were saying how Brenda uses Western ideologies, and she also uses traditional ideologies together to kind of explain or kind of understand what is happening with a person. So do you think adding Western knowledge could be an advantage or a disadvantage when trying to combine it with traditional and like medicinal, natural practices?
Yeah, there's definitely both advantages and disadvantages to combining Western medical knowledge and traditional medical knowledge. And so a lot of it really depends on the patient and who you're treating, and what their own experiences are with the medical healthcare system. For example, especially for Indigenous peoples, because of so many past atrocities that have happened within the healthcare system, there's huge mistrust for doctors and for the healthcare system, due to, mass sterilizations of our women, for example, and other things as well. And so a lot of communities have this huge distrust for the healthcare system. And so if you try to explain things to them from like a Western medical perspective, they might be very suspicious of that, just because of their experiences with the healthcare system. And, that is a really unfortunate kind of consequence of the way that the healthcare system has treated Indigenous peoples historically, and even now. And the one of the things with that is that, from a purely like medical perspective, the Western way of doing medicine and Western knowledge offers a lot. Modern medicine does save lives and does help heal people and treat people, and there is a lot of knowledge within the scientific world that needs to be taken seriously and applied seriously to a person's health. But that being said, the plant medicine and the traditional forms of medicine also are a wealth of knowledge that needs to be applied to a person's health and have and do save lives and heal people as well. And so the idea of picking one side or the other, you're really picking, between two good things. And so why would you take one of those away when they each have advantages that they can offer, and they're 100% capable of working in unison together if we allow them to and if we apply them in that way. But that being said, there are going to be times where you kind of need to prefer one or the other according to a patient's health and a patient's life experiences with health and medicine and well-being. Because, again, even from a non-Indigenous perspective, there's a lot of people who are super skeptical about natural healing and plant medicine and things like that as well. And so kind of making space for the patient's feelings to be validated in regards to those two different worlds is important as well. But it doesn't necessarily mean we abandon one or the other of the worlds.
Yeah, no, I like that. I like what you said. If there's two good things, you can't really choose one or the other, but you choose it according to one's preferences or one's lived experience. And that's kind of what we talk about in the medicine world, is that you don't see a patient for them to be like a copy paste of the next. Everyone's traumas and stresses, they all manifest differently in our bodies as well. So we need to look at each person differently from the rest and treat them differently from the rest, because the way, let's say, a treatment would work on me might not be as effective as it might be on you or Arushi, for example. So it's kind of like using both types of worlds but combining it to fit the individual. And I think that's very important, and I think that's something that we have to kind of give attention to moving forward, especially in the medicine world, because I do agree with you. I think that sometimes one thing could be, let's say, traditional healing could be better for one person versus modern medicine, but a combination of the two could be the best for another individual. So it's just looking at the person for what their body kind of needs to feel and be better. So I completely agree with that. And I know we talked a lot about medicinal healing is kind of looking at a whole body type of perspective. So for you, how important is that perspective, that whole body perspective?
For me, it is very important. As somebody who has also had and does have like mental health struggles as well, and I think, especially like for me and like my own personal experience, having ulcerative colitis, it's very, very common for people who have like digestive disorders to also have mental health struggles as well, and vice versa. And there's a lot of confusion in the scientific world because they know the two are related, but they don't necessarily always know if it's the mental health issue causing the digestive issue or vice versa, which can make treatment and like understanding where the symptoms are stemming from quite difficult. And like I kind of remember briefly being asked when I was like by my doctors if I like felt like I had mental health struggles or anything like that, but like my mom was in the room and I didn't necessarily want to answer the question at the time, and so I kind of brushed it off and like I didn't take it super seriously. And I really wish, looking back, that I had because I might have saved myself a lot of struggle along the way had I been honest at that point. Because now I've kind of suffered for it a little bit in the past few years, and I've really within the last couple of years had to like step back and kind of realize that like this needs to be addressed as well. The mental and emotional health stuff needs to be addressed as well, or the chronic illness is never going to get better. And so like for me, treating the whole body, like you say, I think it's honestly one of the most important things when it comes to health and well-being, because otherwise you miss very, very critical pieces of a person's health and condition that could lead you to the answer or to the solution, or put you on the right path to helping them to find a treatment answer or solution.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I completely agree with you. So in your opinion, how do you think we can kind of step away from treating like the illness or the concern or whatever it may be, but kind of treating the whole person instead?
I think one of the biggest things, which will be and is a huge challenge for our current form of healthcare system, speaking from my own experience, is like that patient-doctor relationship is huge, especially if you are dealing with traumatized people, which most cases, people who have chronic illness, it's stemming from some form of trauma. And so that being said, like there needs to be available space made for the patient to like feel safe enough and not rushed, and feel that they can be honest with their doctor, but also not necessarily be rushed in that, because you're not going to solve a person's issue in one 20-minute appointment. If we're talking about chronic illness and bigger issues and things like that, it takes a lot of time and effort and a lot of digging and a lot of empathy and compassion on the doctor's part for the patient. Because when there's that many things going on in your body, like mental, emotional, physical, it can be really hard for the patient to differentiate between the two. They don't necessarily know like which one, which is which, or how to separate them in their mind, because where they're coming from is they're just in pain, and the pain is the pain, and they want the pain to stop. And so we have to find a way to help patients also understand how to differentiate pain for themselves, and how to kind of talk about their health, and feel safe to talk about their health, and not feel rushed to explain what's going on in their body in one 20-minute appointment, because it's not possible, especially not with chronic illness and deeper illness issues, because there's so much more that goes on in the body than we could ever discover in one 20-minute appointment.
100%. Do you think that like you struggled with trying to interrelate the mental, emotional, and physical aspect, like maybe even growing up and even now?
Yeah, definitely. Like as a teenager going through like the healthcare system, there's already a lot happening in a teenager's body, and then when you throw in like chronic illness and mental illness or mental health struggles, like and your brain isn't like fully developed yet, and you're still learning how to like cognitively identify your emotions and how to process them and how to work through them. And sometimes just identifying like your emotion or your pain and then trying to identify where it's coming from can be like really hard for, I think, an adult, let alone a child or a teenager. And so that was definitely something that I didn't and I didn't even understand that was necessarily a thing. Like I wasn't consciously aware of at the time that like I needed to be able to separate the two or like talk about them in relationship to each other, or like identify them, because I just wasn't aware of that. I had no prior understanding, no ability to recognize that need at all. And it's only been as an adult that I've kind of come to a place where I'm recognizing like, oh, like this is something that needs to happen in order for me to move forward in my healing and my health. But that doesn't necessarily mean I can just like do it all of a sudden as an adult. You have to like learn how to do that and like work on how to do that and like have resources and have people to help teach you how to do that as well. Because if you didn't grow up knowing how to do that or being taught how to do that, like it's something that it's like learning how to ride a bike as like a 45-year-old adult. Like you have no clue, kind of thing.
Yeah.
In my experience.
Yeah, no, I also feel like those three kind of components, like the mental, emotional, the physical, even the spiritual, they can be very hard to navigate, and everyone's definition of what those aspects look like is very different from one person to another. And just to even recognize how you're feeling one day can be very different from the next day or the previous day. And so like, you know, chronic illnesses, they change day to day. So does your mental, your emotional, your physical, and your spiritual. So as a kid, when you're just trying to realize, well, why am I feeling this way? It can be very hard to put that in words as well. And that's not just a kid. Like, I feel like sometimes we struggle with that as adults. And that can be really tough because it's, you know, you're still a working citizen. You're still going to work. You're still, you know, you still have bills to pay. You still have to do this and that and this, that. Sometimes it's so easy to forget about your health. And it's so easy to just forget about those components and how those components relate to health. Like, we had a guest speaker come in, and she was an elder, and she spoke about how stress manifests in our body. And that's something that when someone says that to you, you're like, well, yeah, that does make sense. But I don't think I ever truly kind of understood it or even gave it a thought before the podcast recording, that stress does manifest in our body and it looks different from person to person. Stress doesn't always mean high blood pressure. Stress can mean high cholesterol. Stress can mean, it doesn't even have to be like that. It can be just simple things like affecting your spiritual health, affecting your mental health. And so it's these things that we, you know, they make sense when someone says it to us. When the doctor says it to us, you're like, oh yeah, I got that, I understood that. But to truly understand it, I think takes more than, like you said, that 1 20-minute appointment that you get every 3-4 months. So that can be,
no, for sure.
Yeah, very difficult. So yeah, we talked about how, you know, you were Métis and you didn't know you were Métis for a pretty long time in your life. As a Métis individual, did you ever feel marginalized from the Indigenous community?
Yeah, I think a lot in the beginning of my kind of journey, like knowing you're Métis but not having any like way of understanding what that is, or having anybody in community or be in connection with anybody to help you understand that, kind of makes me feel like you're not actually Métis or not actually part of that Indigenous community. And so because you don't really know that much about your history or your culture or your family, and because you don't feel like you can live that culture every day, it really like makes you feel like an outsider in your own culture and community. And sometimes, like, even after like starting the Reconnection journey and being like within community, you can experience imposter syndrome big time, because you feel like you should know everything that everybody around you knows about your culture, but you don't. And you feel like less of a you feel almost less Indigenous because you don't know all of the things that you should know about your culture. But that's not your fault. And nobody can make you feel or be less Indigenous than you are. But it's like a lie that we tell ourselves, because we don't feel Indigenous, we don't feel connected, and we can acknowledge that there's this big hole in our lives because of that, but we don't necessarily know what to do to fill it, or where to go for connection.
Mm-hmm. So for you, the connection was learning more about, I guess, holistic healing, natural medicine. And so that was kind of your path into reconnecting with your culture and your identity.
Yeah.
Yeah. So did you ever feel like, you know, having that imposter syndrome that you were saying, did you feel like that affected you mentally, even emotionally, spiritually, growing up, or even now?
Definitely. And definitely even now, I think it's something that almost all Indigenous people experience at different points throughout their life. And I think the more removed you've been from your community, or the more trauma that has happened to your community, will increase that feeling throughout your life, and will increase the recurrence of that feeling throughout your life. And so, like, as a child, like, I was ecstatic that I was Métis, but I didn't know what that meant. And if you tried to, like, tell somebody you were Métis, well, I often, like, there's so many different responses, and a lot of the time it was some form of, like, well, you can't be Métis, or you don't look Métis, or, like, what makes you Métis? What makes you different than us? Like, there was all of this sort of like undermining of the belief that I was Métis, from people who weren't Indigenous and didn't understand that, and sometimes even from people who were Indigenous, because of their own brokenness in their journeys. And so even as an adult, you get as somebody, when you're trying to, like, reconnect with your community, there's the whole issue of lateral violence as well within Indigenous communities. And so you have a community of traumatized, broken people who are all trying to understand and reconnect to their culture. And at different points in their journey, it's quite common for people whose family experience is different than yours, or cultural experience is different from yours, to look at you and say, well, that's not Métis, that's not Indigenous, because they're speaking from their own experience. But that doesn't necessarily mean that your experience is any less Métis or Indigenous than theirs. But that's their own way of trying to, you know, reconcile their own journey, and, like, affirm themselves that they are Indigenous and that they are Métis, because it's stemming from their own insecurity and their identity. And that is a huge plague within a lot of Indigenous communities right now, and it's something that we really have to work hard to overcome. Is that lateral violence as well?
Yeah. And how did you kind of navigate that growing up?
You know, I think for a long time, without even knowing it, I really just kind of started to naturally hide the fact that I was Métis, because I just wouldn't bring it up in conversation ever, or I only brought it up with certain individuals who I knew it was safe to bring it up with, because in my mind it was just easier that way. It made more sense, and so I did that for a long time, until I reconnected with the community and started to like have conversations with other Métis individuals and Indigenous people who had similar experiences. And it wasn't until I understood the greater kind of historical and generational context of why I naturally felt the need to hide I was Métis, that I sort of realized that I didn't need to be ashamed of it, because it was very, very common for a lot of Métis people, and other Indigenous peoples as well, where if they were white passing, or if it was possible to hide the fact that they were Indigenous, they would do so, because it meant that they had a greater chance of survival, and of being accepted by Canadian society and being successful within Canadian society. Because because they had kind of two options. They had, be successful by Canadian society standards, or be in a community full of poverty and addiction and mental health crises and hopelessness. For a lot of people, those were the two options, and picking to hide your identity was the better option at the time. And as like an adult now, and as somebody who's reconnected, that you realize that doesn't have to be the only two options, and that in today's society, like, things are changing hugely and are going to continue to change hugely between Indigenous and non-Indigenous peoples in Canadian society. And you can either embrace that and be a part of it or not. And choosing to embrace that and openly identify as Métis does not mean that I'm going to go without facing people who are on opposing sides, or people who want to hold on to old ways of thinking and stereotyping Indigenous peoples. That's still going to happen. That has happened. But the other thing is, now our communities are gaining in strength. And so instead of looking to outsiders for validation, we need to focus on our own communities growing strong again within each other, and that lateral kindness within our communities, and healing for ourselves. Because, the non-Indigenous community isn't going to do the healing for us. That's something that we have to do. And so embracing that is our opportunity to come back from everything that's happened to us, by embracing each other and choosing lateral kindness over lateral violence, and choosing to be gracious with each other in our reconnection journeys, as we learn about our culture and as we share our culture, both with each other as Indigenous peoples, but also with non-Indigenous peoples who are willing to learn and who want to be a part of the reconciliation process, because those people who genuinely do want to be part of that process do bring healing to Indigenous people as well.
Yeah. So I have a question for you. You brought the word reconciliation up. To you, what does that word mean?
I think for me, there's a lot of different definitions, and at different points in my life, I've thought it meant different things. But as of where I am right now in my journey, I had the pleasure of meeting at Painted Warriors, one of the owners, Tim Mearns. I had the pleasure of meeting his mom before she passed away, and she was a residential school survivor. And she had an incredible story, and was an absolutely incredible woman. And I always think back to what she says about reconciliation, no matter who she's speaking to, if she's speaking to Indigenous or non-Indigenous people. She always says that the only way reconciliation will ever happen is that you have to reconcile with yourself first. And so for me, when I think of reconciliation, that's what I think of. And reconciling with yourself is going to look different for every single person on the planet. But also reconciliation between people, Indigenous, non-Indigenous, all of the above, can't happen unless we all do the work to reconcile with ourselves first. So that's what reconciliation means to me.
I do like that. Like, it all begins with you before you can start doing something for the world in a way. Yeah. So I know you're not a holistic healer right now, but you're still learning and you're studying. Is that something you would want to pursue in the future, is to become a holistic healer?
I think to a certain extent, yes. I think there's a lot of different, practical applications of what it means to be a holistic healer, of course. And I think, one of the biggest things for me is I have no intention of stopping learning about traditional plant medicine from Brenda and from the elders and from other Indigenous people. It is definitely my intention to continue with that. And to carry that knowledge on to the best of my abilities within the community, and whenever possible, to use that knowledge to help my community and to help people who are seeking to use that knowledge in a genuine and respectful manner. So, yeah, I guess that's what that looks like moving forward for me.
Okay, awesome. Thank you so much. We learned a lot, and you said a lot of insightful comments about, whole body perspective versus, looking at just a single symptom or illness and just your own experience. Thank you so much for sharing that. I do have one final question for you and for our listeners. And to wrap up the episode for today, my question is, if you could leave the listeners with one point or learning or even a highlight, what would that be?
I think, out of all of the things that we've discussed today, and moving forward, I think that the one thing that I would really stress for listeners is to take some time to reflect what reconciling with yourself means for you and how that applies to your whole body health and well-being. Whether that is reconciliation between Indigenous and non-Indigenous peoples, or as an Indigenous person yourself, or just as a non-Indigenous person yourself who has their own, hurts and traumas and lived experiences that have impacted and do impact your whole body health and well-being. Because reconciling with yourself is a huge part of that health and well-being journey as well. And I think it's a huge starting point for everybody, no matter where you're at in your health and well-being journey, no matter if you have chronic illness or not, or what that looks like. There's always going to be some form of illnesses that manifest in our bodies. And so I think taking the time to really deep dive into what it means to reconcile that with yourself will not only have a huge impact on yourself and your own well-being, but also on the community around you and the people you interact with on the daily, because that is something that will go forth out from you and into the world as well.
True. I really like what you kind of left our listeners with, is just to kind of reflect and reconcile with oneself before, putting that out in the world, understanding your own health and your wellness, your spiritual, all of that aspect before trying to, give back to the world. So I really do like the little learning that you left with our listeners. So I really want to thank you, Bridgette, for joining us today and sharing your insights. I really enjoyed the conversation we had. And I know Arushi wasn't able to ask any questions right now. She's looking at me. Our speaker wasn't working. But we do appreciate you taking your time to, come on our podcast. And for all the listeners, this is actually an online podcast. You're actually our first online podcast phoning in. So this is a new experience for us. So thank you so much. But yeah, thank you so much for coming. And if there's anything else you'd like to say.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It was a pleasure to meet both of you, and I hope I can stay in touch with you, Harveen, in the future. That would be lovely. And just I really hope that this podcast goes well for you guys and that you are able to continue with this, because I think this is I really think the heart of what you guys have going with this podcast is amazing, and it's going to bring good things in the world too. And so thank you for letting me be a part of that.
No, thank you for coming. And we just want to thank CJSW, the Indigenous Global and Local Health Office, the Grandmothers Lodge at the Faculty of Social Work, the UCreate team, and our editor, Atea, for helping us with this podcast. And thank you to everyone who tuned in. And to listen to our full episodes, tune into Apple Music, Spotify, or CJSW.com to listen to more special guests and their insightful discussions. And keep a lookout for our next episodes. And until then, stay warm.